The Galactic Council convened in the crystalline amphitheater of Xylos Prime, its domed ceiling shimmering with starlight filtered through ancient force fields. Delegates from dozens of species sat in tiered silence as the verdict against humanity was read aloud. Earth's representatives, led by diplomat Carl Dawson and scientist Lena Ortiz, stood in the accused circle, their faces grim but composed. Accused of reckless expansion, unauthorized terraforming, and violating the Prime Accord by developing forbidden quantum weaponry, humanity was declared a threat to galactic stability. The sentence: total exile beyond the outer rim, with all human colonies ordered dismantled and Earth placed under permanent quarantine. No appeals, no exceptions. As the Council's enforcers escorted them out, Carl whispered to Lena, "They think they're burying us. They don't know we're seeds." The air inside the amphitheater was cold, not from temperature but from judgment. Every breath felt heavy, as if the weight of 1,000 alien eyes pressed down on Carl and Lena. Around them, beings with scales, feathers, chitin, and smooth metallic skin watched without pity. Some hissed in satisfaction. Others simply turned away, already forgetting the humans as if they were dust on a forgotten moon. Carl kept his back straight, his hands clasped behind him. He had argued for weeks, presented data, offered compromises, even begged when protocol allowed. But the Council had made up its mind long before the trial began. Humanity had grown too fast, too bold. They had built cities on worlds the Council claimed as neutral. They had turned barren rocks into gardens using gene-tweaked moss and atmospheric processors. Worst of all, they had tested a new kind of drive, one that folded space without leaving a detectable wake. To the Council, that was not innovation. It was stealth. And stealth, in their eyes, meant danger. Lena Ortiz stood beside him, her dark eyes fixed on the central dais where the High Arbiter, a tall being with translucent skin and glowing veins, held the decree. She had spent her life studying cosmic harmonics, trying to prove that faster-than-light travel could be clean, safe, and shared. She never imagined her work would be twisted into evidence of treachery. The quantum resonance core she helped design was meant to power hospitals and deep space farms, not weapons. But the Council's intelligence branch had intercepted a military prototype, stolen, she suspected, by a rival human faction, and presented it as proof of Earth's warlike intent. She wanted to shout, to explain, but protocol forbade speech once the verdict was sealed. So she stayed silent, her jaw tight, her mind already racing ahead to what came next. Outside the amphitheater, the sky of Xylos Prime burned violet at the edges, a permanent twilight caused by the planet's twin suns. Enforcers clad in silver armor guided the two humans down a ramp toward awaiting transport. No cuffs, no weapons drawn. Humanity was still considered too weak to resist. That was their mistake. As they walked, Carl glanced back once. He saw the towering spires of the Council City, gleaming like frozen lightning, and the endless rows of alien ships in orbit. He saw arrogance, complacency, the belief that order meant control and control meant peace. He knew better. Peace wasn't given. It was built. And sometimes it had to be rebuilt from nothing. The transport carried them to the human delegation's temporary quarters, a small, windowless station on the edge of Council space. There they found the rest of their team, engineers, linguists, medics, all waiting in stunned silence. News of the verdict had spread fast. Some wept. Others stared at the walls, numb. But a few, like pilot Eli Grant and engineer Maya Ruiz, were already packing gear, checking comms, scanning star charts. They hadn't come here to surrender. They'd come to survive. Carl gathered everyone in the main chamber. "We're not prisoners," he said, his voice low but steady. "We're pioneers. The Council thinks exile is a death sentence, but space is big, bigger than they remember. And out there, past the rim, past the Veil Nebula, there are places they've never mapped, never dared to go. That's where we'll go." Lena stepped forward, pulling up a holographic map. "The Veil is unstable," she admitted. "Gravitational tides, time echoes, radiation storms. But my models show a narrow corridor, barely wide enough for one ship that might lead through. If we can navigate it, we disappear. And if we disappear long enough, we rebuild." No one argued. There was no point. Earth was lost to them now. Their families, their homes, their history, all locked behind a quarantine wall. But they still had each other. And they still had their minds, their hands, their stubborn will to keep going, Over the next 48 hours, they prepared. They stripped the station of every useful part. Power cells, medical kits, seed banks, even the floor panels if they held recyclable metal. Eli rerouted the engines of their 3 remaining colony ships, linking them into a single convoy. Maya jury-rigged a shield modulator using spare parts from a broken comms array. It wouldn't stop a warship, but it might hide their heat signature from long-range scans. As the convoy undocked, Carl stood at the viewport watching Xylos Prime shrink into a violet speck. He thought of his daughter, last seen waving from a schoolyard in Denver, her face bright with dreams he could no longer protect. He thought of the forests, the oceans, the quiet hum of a world that had birthed explorers, poets and fools who reached for the stars. They hadn't asked for war. They'd only asked for room to grow, and for that, they were cast out. But as the stars stretched into lines and the convoy plunged toward the unknown, something shifted inside him. Not despair, not anger, purpose. The council had banished them, yes, but in doing so, they'd freed them. No more rules, no more oversight, no more begging for permission to exist. Out here in the dark between galaxies, humanity would answer to no one but itself. And if they survived, if they thrived, they wouldn't just return. They'd rise, not as rebels, not as beggars, but as equals, or more. The convoy entered the edge of the Veil Nebula. The stars ahead twisted like smoke. Sensors flickered. Time itself seemed to stutter. But the ships held course. Behind them, the last light of council space faded. Head only darkness and possibility. Carl turned from the viewport and walked toward the bridge. There was work to do, a new world to find, a future to build, and humanity, though banished, was far from broken. Stripped of their fleet and confined to outdated colony ships, the remnants of humanity, nearly 2 billion souls, embarked on a desperate journey past the Veil Nebula, a region deemed impassable by the Council due to gravitational anomalies and temporal distortions. Captain Eli Grant, a former deep space salvage pilot, took command of the ragtag armada. With limited supplies and failing engines, morale plummeted until engineer Maya Ruiz discovered that the nebula's chaotic energy fields could be harnessed to power experimental warp cores. Risking everything, they plunged deeper, emerging not an empty void but in a hidden sector teeming with dormant alien megastructures and untapped resources. Among the ruins, they found the Echo Spire, a relic of a long-vanished civilization capable of rewriting matter at the atomic level. The convoy of ships creaked like old bones in a storm. 3 main colony vessels, Haven, Promise, and Horizon, led the exodus, each packed far beyond safe capacity. Corridors overflowed with families sleeping in shifts. Cafeterias doubled as classrooms and clinics. Air recyclers groaned under the strain, and food synthesizers spat out bland nutrient paste that tasted like chalk and regret. Outside, the Veil Nebula loomed like a wall of shattered glass, swirling with violet lightning and silent ripples that bent light into impossible shapes. No ship had ever returned from it. The Council called it the Edge of Reason. Humans called it their only chance. Eli Grant stood on the bridge of the Haven, his eyes fixed on the flickering navigation screen. He was not a military man, not really. He'd spent most of his life patching up derelict freighters in asteroid belts, trading scrap for fuel and telling tall tales in portside bars. But when the Council cut their comms and sealed Earth's orbit, someone had to steer this broken fleet into the unknown. He hadn't asked for the job, but no one else would take it. Now, with oxygen levels dropping and mutiny whispers growing in the lower decks, he felt the weight of every soul aboard pressing down on his shoulders. Days turned into weeks. The nebula's outer currents tugged at the ships like invisible hands. Gravity sensors screamed false alarms. Time logs glitched, sometimes showing 2 hours had passed, sometimes 2 minutes. People reported hearing voices in the static, seeing faces in the shadows of empty halls. A child on the Promise swore she saw her grandmother waving from a viewport, though the woman had died years before on Mars. Fear spread faster than the failing oxygen filters. Then Maya Ruiz called an emergency meeting in Engineering Bay 3. She was young, barely 30, with grease-streaked overalls and eyes that never stopped moving. While others despaired, she'd been studying the nebula's energy patterns, cross-referencing them with old Earth physics models. It's not chaos, she told Eli and a small group of trusted officers. It's noise. But noise has rhythm. And rhythm can be used. She pointed to a schematic on her tablet. The nebula emits quantum fluctuations. Wild, yes, but consistent in their randomness. If we reroute the warp cores to absorb, not resist those fluctuations, we might not just survive the passage. We might get a power boost. Eli stared at the diagram. It looked like madness. Redirecting warp energy during a nebula crossing was like trying to drink from a fire hose while standing in a hurricane. One mistake and the core would overload, vaporizing the ship. But they were running out of time. The oxygen would last another 10 days. Food maybe 15. Do it, he said. The next 48 hours were a blur of welding torches, rewired conduits, and sleepless shifts. Maya worked with a skeleton crew, her hands flying over control panels, her voice calm even as alarms blared. Eli walked the decks, talking to families, sharing rations, listening to fears. He didn't promise safety. He promised honesty. We're trying something new, he'd say. It might work. It might not. But doing nothing is the same as giving up. And we don't do that. On the morning of the test, the entire convoy held its breath. Maya stood at the main console, fingers hovering over the activation switch. Eli stood beside her, arms crossed, jaw set. Ready, Steve, he asked. She nodded. For all of us, she pressed the button. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the ship shuddered. Lights dimmed. The air hummed with a deep, resonant tone that vibrated in their bones. Outside, the nebula's swirls seemed to slow, then coil around the haven like a living thing. The warp core glowed blue-white, not red-hot. Readings stabilized. Power levels climbed. Oxygen recyclers whirred back to full strength. A cheer rose from the bridge, quiet at first, then swelling into something raw and real. They had done it. They were riding the storm, not fighting it. Emboldened, Eli ordered the fleet deeper into the veil. The other ships followed, their cores synced to Maya's design. Days later, the nebula thinned. Stars reappeared, not the familiar constellations of home, but stranger. Brighter ones clustered around a pale blue spiral arm no human had ever seen. Sensors picked up massive structures drifting in the void, rings wider than planets, towers that pierced asteroid fields, and a central spire that pulsed with soft golden light. They approached cautiously. Scans showed no life signs, no active defenses, just silence and scale. The largest object, which they later called the Echo Spire, stood alone in a debris-free zone, as if space itself respected its presence. When a shuttle landed on its surface, the hull didn't scrape rock. It sank slightly as if the spire welcomed them. Inside, walls shifted like liquid metal, forming corridors that led exactly where the explorers needed to go. In the central chamber, a pedestal held a sphere of swirling silver mist. When Lena Ortiz touched it, visions flooded her mind. Star maps, equations, blueprints for machines that could reshape atoms, heal wounds in seconds, turn dust into steel. The spire wasn't a weapon. It was a library, a gift from a civilization that had mastered creation itself, and then vanished, leaving their knowledge for those wise enough to find it. Back on the haven, news spread fast. Despair turned to wonder. People who had stopped smiling began to plan again. Children drew pictures of the spire. Engineers sketched ideas for new ships. Farmers talked about growing crops in zero-G using spire-derived soil. Eli watched it all from the observation deck, a rare smile on his face. They were no longer refugees. They were discoverers. Maya joined him, holding 2 cups of rehydrated coffee. What now? She asked. He looked out at the spire, glowing like a second sun. Now, he said, we learn, we build. We become something the Council never imagined. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by the ruins of a forgotten empire, humanity took its first real step toward a future no one had predicted, not even themselves. They had been cast out, yes, but in the dark they had found light, and with it the tools to forge a new destiny. Using the Echo Spire's technology, humanity began rebuilding not just ships and cities, but their very understanding of physics. Under the guidance of physicist Daniel Kim and strategist Olivia Shaw, Earth's exiles forged a new society built on cooperation, innovation, and resilience. They constructed orbital foundries that turned asteroids into warships in weeks, not years. They developed bio-enhanced crops that thrived in hostile atmospheres. Most crucially, they reverse-engineered the Spire's core to create the Genesis drives. engines that bent space without violating the laws the Council held sacred. Within a generation, the Terran conquered rose from the ashes, a unified, peaceful, yet fiercely independent coalition of human worlds. They called their new home the Aegis Reach, and they vowed never to forget what exile had taught them. The first year in the Aegis Reach was not about conquest, but survival. The Echo Spire gave them knowledge, but knowledge alone could not feed children or shield them from cosmic radiation. Daniel Kim, a quiet man with ink-stained fingers and a mind that saw patterns in chaos, spent his days inside the Spire's central chamber, translating its silent language into human terms. He learned that matter was not fixed, it could be persuaded, reshaped, reborn. With this, he taught teams how to turn iron-rich asteroids into breathable air, how to weave carbon filaments into self-repairing hulls, how to grow entire habitats from seed-like nanites that bloomed into domes under starlight. Olivia Shaw, once a logistics officer on Earth's Mars colony, now coordinated everything from water recycling to defense drills. She didn't wear a uniform, but people followed her orders without question. She believed in fairness, not force. Every person, from the youngest student to the oldest engineer, had a role. No one was idle. No one was ignored. When a dispute arose over housing on the newly terraformed moon of Viridia, Olivia didn't send guards. She called a town meeting. They talked for hours, then voted. The solution was simple: rotate living quarters every season so everyone shared both the best and worst views. It worked. Trust grew. The orbital foundries came next. Built from salvaged ship parts and Spire-forged alloys, they floated in stable orbits around 3 habitable worlds. Workers guided streams of raw asteroids into the forges, where molecular lattices were rearranged in minutes. A single rock the size of a house could become a hospital, a school, or the skeleton of a new vessel. These weren't warships, not at first. They were freighters, science vessels, mobile farms. But as the population grew and scouts reported strange energy signatures at the edge of their sector, Olivia and Daniel agreed they needed protection. Not for aggression, but for peace. That's when they turned to the Genesis drives. Unlike the old warp engines that tore holes in space, the Genesis drives worked like a gentle hand-folding fabric. They created a bubble of calm reality around a ship, allowing it to slip between stars without leaving a trace. The Council had banned such technology because they feared stealth, but the Concorde used it only for exploration and emergency response. Still, the drives gave them speed, silence, and safety. A ship could leave Viridia at dawn and reach the outer ice rings by dusk. This changed everything. Cities rose not on planetary surfaces alone, but in the sky. Floating platforms hovered above toxic seas, drawing energy from lightning storms. Underground farms on dry worlds used bioluminescent fungi to grow wheat and potatoes in total darkness. Children learned physics by playing with gravity simulators. Elders taught history not as a list of wars, but as lessons in humility. How pride led to banishment, and how unity led to rebirth. Eli Grant, now retired from active command but still respected as a founder, walked the streets of New Haven, the first true city of the conquered. It had no walls, no gates. Its heart was a public square where anyone could speak, share ideas, or ask for help. He often sat on a bench near the central fountain, watching kids race toy ships powered by tiny Genesis cores. He never spoke of the old Earth much, but when he did, it was with sadness, not bitterness. "We lost a home," he'd say, "but we found a purpose." Maya Ruiz led the engineering guild. She trained apprentices not just to fix machines, but to understand them. "A tool is only as good as the mind that uses it," she told them. Under her, every ship carried a repair drone that could rebuild itself from scrap. Every home had a matter recycler that turned waste into clean water or building blocks. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was taken for granted. Lena Ortiz, now the Concorde's chief archivist, preserved human culture alongside alien knowledge. She stored songs, recipes, poems, and family stories in crystal archives that would last millennia. She also recorded the Spire's teachings, making sure no single person controlled its power. Knowledge, she insisted, must be free. Libraries were built on every world, open to all, with terminals that translated Spire data into simple lessons. A farmer could learn quantum botany. A poet could study stellar harmonics. Everyone was a student. Everyone was a teacher. As decades passed, the Concorde grew, not through conquest but through invitation. When a damaged alien freighter drifted into their space, lost and starving, they didn't turn it away. They repaired its hull, shared food, and offered sanctuary. The crew, a group of insectoid traders from the fringe systems, stayed. They brought new languages, new foods, new ways of thinking. Others followed. Refugees from council oppression, scientists seeking truth, artists fleeing censorship, all found a home in the Aegis Reach. Humanity did not rule them. They joined as equals. The Concord had no president, no emperor. Decisions were made by councils of citizens, chosen by lot and rotated yearly. Laws were few. Protect life, share knowledge, defend the vulnerable, and never hoard power. It wasn't perfect. Arguments happened. Mistakes were made. But they listened. They adapted. They remembered. And always they looked to the stars. Not with fear, but with curiosity. Scouts mapped new systems. Scientists studied dark matter clouds. Artists painted nebulae in colors no human eye had seen before. The Genesis drives carried them farther, faster, safer than ever imagined. Yet they never forgot the lesson of their exile. Power without wisdom is ruin. Strength without kindness is tyranny. One evening, Daniel Kim stood on a balcony overlooking New Haven. The sky was clear, filled with stars and the soft glow of orbiting stations. Olivia joined him, holding 2 cups of mint tea grown in Viridia's vertical gardens. "Do you think they're watching us?" she asked, meaning the council. "Maybe," he said, "but it doesn't matter. We're not building this for them. We're building it for us, for the next child who asks, 'What's out there?' and gets to find out." Below them, the city hummed with life. Quiet, steady, and full of hope. Banished once, humanity had not just survived. They had learned to thrive without losing their soul. And in doing so, they had built something rarer than an empire. A home worth protecting not for its walls, but for the people within it. Decades later, a council patrol vessel strayed too close to the Aegis Reach while tracking a rogue comet. What they found stunned them. A thriving human civilization with technology surpassing even the council's elite fleets. News spread like wildfire. The council, now fractured by internal dissent and facing threats from the insectoid krill swarm, debated whether to re-engage or destroy humanity before it became unstoppable. Ambassador Carl Dawson, now elderly but sharp-eyed, was summoned to a secret meeting on neutral ground. There he offered not war but alliance. "We don't want your throne," he told the trembling delegates. "We built our own. But if the Krell consume you, they'll come for us next. Stand with us or fall alone." The patrol ship was small, battered, and clearly lost. Its hull bore the silver sigil of the Galactic Council, faded by years of hard service. When it crossed the outer sensor net of the Aegis Reach, defense drones moved to intercept, not to attack but to guide. Standard Concord protocol for unknown vessels was calm, not combat. The ship's crew, 3 reptilian Veln and a nervous human liaison from a council-aligned colony, were brought aboard the orbital station Dawn's Edge for questioning. They expected prison cells. Instead, they were given warm meals, medical scans, and a quiet room with a view of Viridia's green continents below. It was the human liaison, a young man named Felix, who first saw the truth. Through the viewport, he watched a Concorde freighter, sleek, silent, glowing faintly blue, dock without a single thruster flare. Its hull shimmered as it adjusted to station gravity, like water finding its level. "That's not possible," he whispered. But it was. And it was everywhere. More ships moved through the sector, some carrying cargo, others escorting scientific probes. All moved with a grace and efficiency the council hadn't achieved in centuries. When Felix reported what he saw, the council high chamber erupted. Some delegates demanded immediate military action. "They've hidden their power for decades," hissed the Cathari representative, her voice like grinding stone. "Now they're strong enough to strike." Others, weary from years of fighting the Krell swarm, a relentless insectoid force devouring entire systems, saw opportunity. "If they're that advanced," argued the gentle-toned Lumari elder, "perhaps they can help us." But fear won the first vote. A stealth fleet was dispatched to map the Aegis Reach, gather intel, and if possible, sabotage key infrastructure. They never made it past the outer rim. Conquered early warning buoys, disguised as space dust, detected their warp signatures before they dropped out of fold space. Without firing a shot, the Concorde sent a message. Turn back. You are not welcome here, but you are not in danger yet. The fleet retreated, humiliated. Panic spread through the council halls. Humanity wasn't just surviving. They were watching, and they were ready. Meanwhile, in New Haven, Carl Dawson received the news with quiet sadness. He was 83 now, his hair white, his steps slow, but his mind as sharp as ever. He had spent the last 40 years teaching history and ethics at the Concord Academy, reminding students that exile was not the end, but a beginning. Now the past had come knocking. Olivia Shaw, now head of Concord External Relations, asked him to speak for humanity. "They know your name," she said. "They remember the trial. If anyone can make them listen, it's you," Carl agreed. Not for glory, but for peace. He knew the Krell were real. Scouts had seen their hive ships at the far edge of known space, stripping planets bare, converting biomass into more warriors. If the council fell, the Krell would keep coming. The Aegis Reach would be next. The meeting place was the neutral moon of Thalos 7, a barren rock with no atmosphere and no history. Just a dome, 2 chairs, and a translator field. Carl arrived alone, wearing simple gray robes, no insignia, no weapons. Across from him sat 3 council envoys, the Cathari warlord, the Lumari elder, and a human delegate named Mara Lynn, who had been born after Earth's quarantine and knew humanity only through archives. They spoke for hours. Carl did not boast. He did not threaten. He showed them data, images of Concord cities, farms, schools. He explained the Genesis drives, the matter recyclers, the open libraries. "We didn't build weapons first," he said. "We built hospitals. We didn't seek power. We sought balance." When the Cathari scoffed, Carl turned to her. "You fear us because we grew strong without your permission. But strength isn't evil. It's what you do with it that matters." Then he spoke of the Krell. He showed them sensor logs, intercepted signals, patterns of destruction. They don't negotiate. They consume. If you wait until they reach your core worlds, it will be too late. We can help. Not because we owe you, but because we remember what it's like to stand alone. Silence followed. The Lumari elder bowed her head. Mara Lynn wiped her eyes. Even the Cathari looked uneasy. Finally, the elder spoke. "What do you ask in return?" "Nothing," Carl said. "No territory. No tribute. Just coordination. Share your intel. Let our ships join your defense lines. Fight together, or die apart." Back on the Concord station, Eli Grant watched the transmission with Maya and Lena. "Do you think they'll say yes?" Maya asked. Eli sipped his tea, old and tired but still steady. "Fear makes fools of wise beings, but desperation sometimes makes them wise again. Give them time." 2 weeks later, a formal request arrived. The council, fractured but not broken, asked for a joint strategy session. The Krell had broken through the Serpentis line. Billions were fleeing. The capital itself was at risk. Carl didn't celebrate. He simply nodded and began drafting plans. Not for war, but for survival. For everyone. And as Concord engineers prepped the first Genesis-powered defense fleet, humanity did not gloat. They remembered their exile. And they chose mercy over revenge, unity over pride, because they knew the true measure of an empire wasn't how many it conquered, but how many it saved. When the Krell swarm launched its final assault on the Council's capital, it was not Council warships that held the line, but the Terran Concord's armada, led by Admiral Eli Grant and flanked by ships powered by Genesis drives. Human ingenuity turned the tide. Gravity lances disabled Krell hives, neural disruptors severed their hive mind links, and shield harmonics protected civilian evacuations. In the aftermath, the Council, humbled and grateful, offered humanity full membership and reparations. But Lena Ortiz, now Grand Architect of the Concord, declined. "We're not asking for a seat at your table," she said. "We've built a better one." The Terran Concord opened its borders to all species seeking refuge, knowledge, or partnership, on equal terms. Banished once, humanity now stood not as subjects or conquerors, but as architects of a new galactic order. An empire not of domination, but of mutual strength. The sky over Xylos Prime burned red. Not from sunset, but from fire. Krell hive ships, massive chitinous vessels grown from living metal, descended like locusts blotting out the stars. Their swarms poured onto the surface, dissolving cities into raw biomass, turning libraries into nurseries and citizens into mindless drones. The Council's defenses crumbled. Their shields flickered. Their fleet scattered. Panic choked the comms channels. Evacuation transports jammed the orbital lanes, many torn apart before they could jump to safety. Then, without warning, silence fell. A ripple passed through space, not a blast, but a calm. The Krell ships shuddered as if caught in invisible threads. Their hive mind shrieked across quantum bands, then went quiet. From the edge of the system, emerging from folded space with no warning, came the conquered fleet. Sleek silver-blue vessels glided forward, silent and precise. At their center flew the Aegis Dawn, flagship of Admiral Eli Grant. He was older now, his hair fully gray, his face lined with years of command, but his eyes held the same steady fire that had guided the Exodus decades before. The Concorde didn't charge. They orchestrated. Gravity lances, devices that bent local spacetime, pinned the largest Krell hives in place, freezing them mid-dive. Neural disruptors, tuned to the exact frequency of the Krell collective consciousness, severed the mental links between warriors and their queen. Suddenly, the swarm was no longer one mind, but millions of confused insects, easy prey for precision strikes. Meanwhile, shield harmonics, gentle pulses of protective energy, wrapped around civilian transports, guiding them safely through the chaos like shepherds leading lambs. On the ground, Concorde medics and engineers landed in drop pods, not with weapons but with field hospitals, water purifiers, and translation drones. They treated the wounded regardless of species. They helped rebuild shelters from rubble using matter recyclers. A young Cathari child separated from her clan was found crying in a ruined plaza. A human medic named Jake held her hand, gave her nutrient paste, and stayed with her until her family was located. No one asked for thanks. They simply helped. The battle lasted 3 days. By the fourth morning, the last Krell Queen ship retreated into deep space, broken and bleeding. Xylos Prime was scarred but alive, and it owed its survival not to the Council's might, but to the mercy of those they had once cast out. In the weeks that followed, the Council summoned the Concorde leadership to the rebuilt amphitheater, now patched with temporary panels and lit by emergency lamps. Delegates who once sneered now stood as the humans entered. Carl Dawson walked slowly, leaning on a cane, but his presence filled the room. Beside him stood Lena Ortiz, her silver hair braided simply, her eyes calm but unyielding. Eli Grant followed in uniform but without medals. They needed no symbols. Their deeds spoke louder. The High Arbiter, humbled and weary, offered humanity full council membership, restored colonies, trade rights, and reparations for Earth's quarantine. The chamber held its breath. Lena stepped forward. She did not shout. She did not gloat. Her voice was clear, steady, and kind. "We don't want your seat," she said. "We built our own table, and it has room for everyone." She explained that the Terran Conquered would not join the Council as a member, but as a partner. They would share technology not as gifts but as exchanges. They would defend shared space not as soldiers but as neighbors. And they would open their borders to any being fleeing war, oppression, or disaster. No questions asked, no debts required. Some delegates wept. Others bowed their heads in shame. The Lumari elder rose and placed a hand over her heart, the highest sign of respect in her culture. Back in the Aegis Reach, life continued as it always had, quiet, purposeful, and open. New arrivals came daily, refugees from fallen worlds, scientists seeking knowledge, artists looking for inspiration. They were given housing, language lessons, and a choice: join the Conquered or pass through freely. No one was forced. No one was judged. Children played in parks grown from spire-seeded trees that bloomed in colors unseen on Earth. Students studied under starlight, learning not just how to build, but why to build, to lift others, not to tower over them. Engineers worked alongside alien craftsmen, blending human logic with Cathari intuition or Lumari harmony. The Genesis drives now powered not just ships but peace missions, medical convoys, and seed ships carrying life to dead worlds. Eli Grant retired again, this time for good. He moved to a small house on Viridia's coast, where he fished in the mornings and told stories to visiting kids in the afternoons. Maya Ruiz became head of the Interstellar Builders Guild, ensuring every new station had gardens, libraries, and open courtyards. Carl Dawson passed peacefully in his sleep at 92, surrounded by students who called him Grandfather Truth. His last words were simple: "Remember kindness. It's the strongest force in the universe. And Lena Ortiz, Grand Architect of the Conquered, stood one evening on the observation deck of the Echo Spire, now a living monument and learning center. Below her, ships from a dozen species docked in harmony. Above, the stars shone clear and bright. She thought of the day they were banished, how small and broken they felt. Now they were not rulers. They were builders, not conquerors, connectors. Humanity had been cast out for daring to grow. Now they helped others grow too. And in that quiet act of shared strength, they had built something no empire of force could ever match. A future where no one had to be alone again.